There are plenty of birds in the animal kingdom that can take the title of apex predator, but there's one apex predator of the skies that towers above the rest. I'm talking about the great horned owl. Let's dive in. As always, we're going to start with some identification features for this fantastic bird. The most obvious are the two ear tufts on top of its head. This is where it gets its name, the great horned owl. These feather tufts are iconic, and most people, when they see an owl with two little horns sticking out of its head, they immediately know that's a great horned owl. Great horned owls also have a white bib and really large yellow eyes. Overall, great horned owls are very large. In fact, there's no other owl species that has the ear tufts that's big like the great horned owl. When it's perched, it sits straight up and down on its perch. There's no leaning going on at all. Overall, the owl is mottled brown, white, and black with some striping as well. In flight, it's important to note the broad and short wings on the great horned owl. The only similar species in North America that could possibly be confused for the great horned owl is a snowy owl if you're super far north, because great horned owls are very pale up north, or the long-eared owl, which also has ear tufts that stick straight up, but these owls are much smaller. Again, size is difficult to tell in the field, but long-eared owls will also be super skinny as well, so that should be enough to differentiate the two species if you see a long-eared owl. Great horned owl's scientific name is Bubo virginianus, and like all owls, great horned owls fall into the strigiforms order in the Strigidae family. Its genus Bubo is Latin for an eagle owl or a horned owl, which makes sense, hence its name. In fact, the Eurasian eagle owl, for example, is Bubo, falling into the exact same family. Virginianus is indicative of its location where it's found, so the Virginia colonies or America. The great horned owl has a conservation status of least concern, meaning that the population is doing pretty good. But there was a time where great horned owls, like most birds, were shot from the sky. In fact, in Saskatchewan, where my friend Shayna lives, you were actually legally allowed to hunt great horned owls during a certain season all the way up into the 1970s. And as we know, another certain owl species, the barred owl, is about to be culled or shot across the Pacific Northwest region of the United States, most likely in the near future. Some interesting data indicate that hunting season of the great horned owl in Saskatchewan didn't really have a huge impact on the population overall for the great horned owl. Great horned owls, despite doing well in numbers and having a status of least concern, are also threatened by things like rodenticides and other pesticides when they ingest poison from other rodents. Unlike a lot of other bird species, great horned owls are highly adaptable, meaning that they actually aren't as threatened by habitat loss as some species that rely on a specific habitat. Because great horned owls are generalists, they've done pretty well for themselves despite a lot of habitat disappearing across North America and South America. The interesting thing though about great horned owls is that a lot of their color variation occurs by region, and it depends on the humidity levels in those regions. So for example, the palest individuals of great horned owls are actually in the subarctic, and obviously this would also benefit as like a camouflage for those regions because of the amount of snow up there. And that's where that distinguishing issue you have with snowy owls comes into play, where it doesn't really happen for the rest of the United States. Because in other regions, like the PNW, for example, where there's a lot of humidity happening there, they're darker in coloration. And then in between those two regions, there's more intermediary, great horned owls. Like in the Rocky Mountains, if you see a great horned owl, it's going to look like a typical great horned owl. But when I was in the PNW, the great horned owls that I saw there did seem a little bit darker than the ones we have here. There's actually 14 subspecies of great horned owl, but I'm not going to go through them because it's pretty complex and they're not as distinguishable as like the red-tailed hawk video I did with the 16 subspecies found there. I will mention something interesting though about subspecies. One of those subspecies actually became its own species, the lesser horned owl. And this obviously happened after a whole bunch of research went into it to see if this was the same species, and they found that it was different enough based off of a variety of different factors, including genetics and DNA, to be considered its own species. Like I mentioned before, great horned owls are extremely widespread across North and South America, but especially North America. You can find them across the whole continent, all the way north in Alaska, the top edge of Alaska even, and then all the way to Mexico and throughout Mexico as well. In South America, they live in the northern regions of South America, including Venezuela and Colombia. And then they also live in parts of Brazil, Uruguay, Bolivia, in that more central area. And then there's like a gap in between. I'm not exactly sure what that's about, but yeah, they're kind of dotted all over the 2 continents. They're a very, very successful bird. They're also generalists in their habitat. Great horned owls are known to occupy almost every single habitat across that spectrum. They can regularly be found in swamps, fields, wetlands, deciduous, mixed, and conifer forests. And then they can also be found in suburbs, neighborhoods, and urban areas as well. So if there's an owl in your neighborhood, chances are it's a great horned owl. Many people think that owls are strictly nocturnal. In fact, most cartoons and most mainstream knowledge will tell you all owls are strictly nocturnal. This isn't actually true, but for the great horned owl, they are mostly nocturnal, but they are also crepuscular. And what does that mean? They like twilight hours as well. So just after sunrise and just before sunset, they are active with a little bit of light left. Great horned owls will typically roost in trees, but they can also roost in buildings, cliff sides, man-made structures, and you'll typically find them roosting right up against the tree trunk if they're in a tree. A lot of other owl species will do this as well. Remember, if you learned anything from today, remember that the great horned owl is a generalist and it could possibly be in any situation. They are very flexible and adaptable creatures. What great horned owls aren't are social creatures. In fact, most of the time great horned owls will typically hang out by themselves, unless it's the nesting season, so they'll have a pair bond where the male will go hunting and the female will stay with the nest typically. But other than that, they're pretty solitary creatures. And sometimes you can find other owl species in their vicinity, just not during that breeding season when they're very territorial. Great horned owls are pretty unpopular amongst pretty much every other bird species. They are known to be mobbed by crows, peregrine falcons, American kestrels, Swainsons, redtails, and ferruginous hawks, and a variety of passerine birds, including northern flickers and blue jays. Like I mentioned before, great horned owls are most active at night, and they typically hunt for their food at night as well. If they have an opportunity to eat something during the day though, they're going to take that opportunity. So they're not just exclusive nighttime hunters, they will go get food during the day. It's just a lot rarer. Great horned owls have one of the biggest diets out of all species in North America, hence the label I gave to them, the apex predator of the skies. They are known to eat scorpions, rodents, rabbits, and even geese and herons, 2 very large bird species. That being said, 90% of their diet is typically rodents, while only 10% falls to birds, so they have a very mammal-heavy diet. They've also been documented in the past eating other great horned owls as well, so they're really not picky. If you ever want to know what it's like to hunt like a great horned owl, strap a pair of binoculars to your eyes, tape them up, and then go to the grocery store. They have amazing binocular wide view vision, perfectly adapted for hunting at night. Great horned owls have a disc on their face, and there's other owls that also have this disc. That face disc has a purpose. In fact, it's created specifically to funnel sound bouncing off of its face right to their ears. So it's quite incredible to think that almost every feature on an owl, like the great horned owl, has a very deadly purpose for finding food. It's kind of like one of those like parabolic mics that some birders use out in the field with like the umbrella. That's to funnel sound right to the microphone. That's what the face discs are for as well. As you know, great horned owls will dispel pellets, and this is not something exclusive to great horned owls or even owls in general. Gulls will also do this, and other smaller birds will also dispel pellets. It's often attributed to owls because their pellets are so large and noticeable by us human beings. Great horned owls are thought to be monogamous, but do we really know what's going on in the comfort of their own homes? I don't know. The clutches of eggs typically arrive in the middle of winter around January, but if they're further north, like in Saskatchewan, like I mentioned before, those eggs could come much later, and they've been documented as late as May. Like other birds of prey, they typically only have one brood, but if that brood fails very early in the season, they might attempt another one later on. Again, these owls are extremely adaptable, hence why they're so successful and widespread. They're not picky on their nest sites. In fact, they have the largest range of nest sites out of any bird in North America. They'll typically nest in trees, that is their preferred nest site, but they'll also nest in cavities, buildings, ledges, and even lay eggs straight onto the ground. They don't build their own nests. They're very opportunistic, and a lot of other owl species do this, and falcon species as well, but they'll actually lay their eggs in the old nests of herons, corvids, even squirrel nests. And obviously they'll only do this if they're not nesting in like a tree cavity or on the ledge of a cliff or on the ground. Their eggs are white and they typically lay 1 to 4 per clutch. Only the female incubates the eggs and the male will exclusively hunt. But if the male isn't performing with his hunting duties, after the owlets are born, the female will contribute to that hunting effort as well. When these owlets are born, they're atricial, meaning that they're naked and basically immobile, so they're very vulnerable at that stage. But by day 45, most of the owls have left the nest and are at least experimenting outside of the nest and walking around. The great horned owl mama owls are very good mothers. They actually tear the food up for their baby owlets to eat and make it easier on them trying to swallow these pieces of food. Fledged owls, like a lot of birds of prey, will actually stick with their parents for 4 to 5 months after leaving the nest. So it's a much longer parenting time period for these owls than a lot of smaller passerine species, which is mere weeks at most. I mentioned that great horned owls are the apex predator, but what preys on great horned owls? Well, we don't have any documentation for anything that preys on the adult great horned owls. But for the fledglings and the eggs, crows and ravens are a big risk. Things like raccoons are a risk. If an owlet falls out of its nest, foxes, coyotes will obviously go and eat it. But one threat that I haven't mentioned is that great horned owls will actually go eat fledgling great horned owls. Again, they're not picky on what they're going to eat. They'll go after their own if they have to. Great horned owls have one of the most iconic calls in North America. Just take a listen. What's less known about these owls is they have a variety of other vocalizations that are less popular than the hoo, hoo, hoo. And they'll even do screeches and squawks and other things like that as well. If you're a birder or just a nature enthusiast and you want to find the great horned owl yourself, your best chance is to listen. If you listen at night and you hear the hooting of a great horned owl, especially during breeding season, go back to that location right before sunset or right after sunrise and see if you can catch a glimpse of that owl coming in from a hunt. Other strategies are to look for whitewash below trees to see if you can find where it's roosting, or pellets as well. Just remember owl ethics. You never want to get too close to an owl, and it's pretty easy to tell when an owl is stressed out. If it's looking at you too much, that means you're bothering it, and if it puffs up its feathers, you should probably back away. Also, never approach owls during nesting season. View them from a safe distance because you don't want to interrupt that process either. Here's some fun facts about the great horned owl. I mentioned earlier that great horned owls have a very wide range of things that they like to eat. But one thing I didn't mention is they'll even go after birds of prey, and they've been known to go after things like an osprey, for example. I love the osprey. That's a big bird, and that just shows you that the great horned owl is an apex predator. If you hear two owls hooting, the lower pitched hoot, because yes, you'll be able to tell a difference, is going to be the male. The interesting thing about that though is the males are smaller than the females. So the females are much bigger than the males but have a higher pitched hoot because the smaller males actually have a bigger voice box and it lowers their tone. So if you hear a hoo hoo and a hoo hoo, the higher pitched is the female, lower pitched is the male. As you've seen in cartoons, great horned owls can swivel their heads 180 degrees, and that's because their eyes are locked in their sockets. Us humans, we can look back and forth. Owls are locked in, so they have to rely on the motion of their necks for them to be able to see things in their vicinity. And lastly, these owls live forever. The oldest known great horned owl was 28 years old. That's a long time, almost 3 decades being the top dog of the skies. What incredible creatures. I hope you enjoyed this video on the great horned owl, America's apex predator of the skies. Make sure you check out Bright Eyed Birding, where I take you on weekly adventures, and we see great horned owls quite frequently on the channel, just out in nature. If you'd like to support the channel, links to my merch, my membership programs, and even a donation area where you can help contribute to the gear upgrades of the channel are found in the description below. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you all next time on Bright Eyed Birding Learn.